So I finished The Wrath of Betty, or rather, Willful Child, The Wrath of Betty. Stephen Erikson's second Willful Child book. So this one I felt was a bit different in that the first one had about 30 chapters. This one only had about 10, I think. So there's much longer chapters, much less, it's still episodic, but much less one thing after the other, and jumping in all over the place. I wonder if I'm not sure how publishing works, but imagine he wrote the first one for fun as like something he wanted to do as a parody, whatever. He wrote the first one, and it must have done well, so he signed on to do 2 others. He sort of changed it up in this one. I don't know, with a long view in mind. I don't know if there's an overarching plot yet. There's an overarching conflict between Hadrian and human society, but anyways, just to reiterate what I said with the first one, I highly recommend it to anyone with sort of any understanding of science fiction. Even if you're remotely, it's just pop culture references. You'll have in your head an idea of what science fiction is, and this will very much poke fun at that. And it's just a riot. It's really fun. Yeah, so this one, The Wrath of Betty, of course, is play on The Wrath of Khan, which this book, it doesn't just reference Star Trek. I wrote stuff down to make sure I don't forget. First person we're introduced to is Captain Hans Olo of the Century Warbler, who is this other captain who is towing the line and wants to sort of take Hadrian down. He's doesn't like how out of line Hadrian is, and someone's going to deal with him, and it's going to be him. And he has his liaison with the civilian liaison is Rand Humblenaught, which he makes reference to his namesake, Rand Humblenaught, and when they go to the alternate universe, Rand Humblenaught becomes Humblenaught. I don't know how to actually pronounce her name. Captain Hans Olo, and also Captain Hans Olo on his ship. The ship's captain is a Dr. Yoga, who talks in a very sort of backwards. They have their sentence structure kind of all wacky, and if that's not enough, they are also a little tiny plasticine green thing in robes that moves around like it's an animatronic creature. And his second in command, the 2IC, is Frank Worship, who, the name suggests he adores his captain. So it's also, we're introduced to Betty, which I thought, oh, okay, here we go. We're having sort of a coherent, not to say it's not a coherent plot. What we have, we're setting up Betty to be, I forget Betty's first name, but it's kind of like Noonien Singh. Or was that Data's creator? I get the names mixed up. But it's basically in the Wrath of Khan, whatever Khan's first name is, but like a jarbled mixing of that, Betty. So Betty is Khan. That's what I'm saying. But we're introduced to Betty. It seems like at first that they're all like Klingon. They're speaking like a Klingon language, but Betty's like, stop that made-up language. And Betty's like, she has a picture of Hadrian on the view screen, and is like, I'm going to take you down, Hadrian, whatever. So it's like, oh, we're setting up something. But then we don't see Betty until the very last chapter of this whole book. And anyways. I was wondering, as I said this about the last book, the first book in the series, that it seemed very random. Lots of random things happened. But I wonder if those are all references to various Star Trek episodes that I just totally missed. I'm sure there are in this one. In fact, one of the main ones, I didn't understand until the very end of the book. After I'd read it, I'm like, oh, that was of course a reference to this other movie, The Voyage Home. That was one of my favorite Star Trek movies. How did I totally miss that? But anyway, so I wonder if there's a lot that I thought was just crazy, random, funny stuff, but it's actually specific references just dotted through it. I'd be interested to hear a Trekkie or a Trekker's take on this. to see if there are lots of references, and also just generally, I think they'd enjoy it. Yeah, this one I do this a lot with Erikson's work. I visualize it a lot, especially the Malazan works. Certain scenes are just vivid to me, like I'm watching a motion picture, and sort of the same with this. In fact, a while afterwards, I was thinking about it, and I didn't know I was thinking about it. I was trying to think of that Star Trek episode that I just watched recently that had this, and then I'm like, oh no, that was Willful Child. That wasn't something I visually watched. It was a book I read. So I noticed that with this one, it was more vivid. I don't think it was more vivid, but for whatever reason, I read it more visually. And anyways, one of the starting things I loved was Buck DeFrank. Is that his name? The engineer. Apparently, he had left the ship and had spent turns out to be only 2 weeks on this monastery planet. And for whatever reason, he looked up and he saw something in the stars or a vision or something. And he's like, "There's only one man I know who can stop this." And he gets a phone. He's like, "Get me Hadrian. I want back on the ship." Just a silly little thing that I just loved. I'm like, all right, here we go. This is how we're starting. So there's this multi-parsec wide spatial anomaly that's heading straight to Earth, and it's going to destroy the entire solar system. And what are we going to do? And of course they get there, and within 5 minutes they're like, oh, it's actually Spark, Hadrian's grandfather's dog, and his like childhood pet. Oh, let's get the pet. And the pet stops this thing from happening and shuts down the thing. And now he's got a new crew member. It's the dog Spark. So then the next ones, they visit a planet of rednecks worshipping a billionaire. Sounds familiar. And the billionaire is a former space fleet captain who's been stranded there for 7 years. And Hadrian goes to rescue him, but then the billionaire, ex-captain, stranded captain, wants to take over Hadrian's ship and whatnot, and Spark ends up killing him accidentally in self-defense, we'll say. But yeah, it's this planet of a whole bunch of like rednecks that worship this billionaire, but they're a very small enclave on this planet. That's the rest of the planet is a whole bunch of like bureaucratic socialists that want to fill out a whole bunch of forms and want everyone to yeah, I don't know. They want to help this enclave out and help these people, yeah. Anyways, so the next planet they visit, the captain doesn't go on this one for some reason. He just sends the rest of the people. It's like a planet of like Bigfoots and or Yetis. And they get stranded, and the only way they can get back is to use this railgun launcher to launch themselves into orbit, which is kind of funny. So then they're tracked by this century warbler that's trying to catch up with them, and somehow they end up in a parallel universe. They call it the Bonobo-verse, which I think is a great phrase, the Bonobo-verse. So in this universe, instead of humans and chimpanzees being the closest relative, it's humans and bonobos. And bonobos are more matriarchal and also solve conflict via sexual favors. So of course, I mean, why hasn't anyone else thought of this before? A great setting. So they enter this. It's basically a gender. It's not a gender swap. We had that in the last book right at the end, but in this one, I guess gender roles are reversed. The captain is a female in this Bonobo-verse, but the Bonobo-verse female captain Hadriana gets sent to the normal universe, and the Hadriana, they swap places. So Hadrian's surrounded by all these women who think that, hey, you're a man, you shouldn't be in charge here, and they let out their frustration on James Jimmy Eden by kicking and beating him, and they also solve all conflicts by petting and hugging and sexual favors, which of course causes hilarity. But they managed to get through that issue and switch back just in time to arrive at planet Wally Crap, which is, I mean, you can guess by the name, some mega corporation retail store that is an entire planet that exists in sort of a parallel dimension, pocket dimension. It exists throughout the multiverse somehow, as a form of tax evasion, of course. And it's this planet where, is it once a year or twice a year, they have like a sort of a Black Friday sale where people from all over the multiverse converge to do their shopping, and it's just a glorious celebration. And millions die in not trampolines, they get trampled in stampedes. Is the word I'm looking for. All to buy this worthless crap. Lots of yeah. So they visit this planet, and then there's something with the time cops. Did I mention the time cops? There's these two time cops that are tracking Hadrian because they, I think it was in the last book where there was. Star Trek. There's always time cops when there's time travel involved. So somehow they get zapped 1,000 years into the future, and Wally Crap has become this post-consumerist planet where there are no more humans. There's just a bunch of robots that have based their lives on what they think humans are, based on advertisements, and it's commentary on how gendered advertisements are, how men are like doing dangerous things and fishing and hunting and being outdoorsy and going out, and how women are cooking and cleaning and staying at home. Kind of how advertisements are perpetuating the very gendered, almost 1950s view of gender. Anyways, so while they're in this future universe, something comes and steals Tammy. Of course, our lovely AI brain of the ship steals Tammy. So they go down to the planet to find Tammy. They eventually find that Tammy's been stuck inside of a vending machine to run the vending machine. So they get Tammy back, and they accidentally kill the planet brain that runs the whole planet, freeing the robots. And they take a robot back with them named Beta, this robot woman whose function is questionable. But anyways. So then they meet these people called the Contrarians, who basically whatever they do, whatever you say, they'll say the opposite or do the opposite. Hilarity ensues. And then they say, let's go on a voyage home while we're in the future. So they go back to Terra, or Earth, and it turns out that it's utterly destroyed and depopulated. They're like, wow, when did this happen? And they're like, 6 weeks ago. So it turns out that 6 weeks previous to this 1,000-year future, a giant krill spaceship has come and to communicate with the krill in the ocean, but there were no krill, so the thing got mad and killed everyone. And so Hadrian has an idea. Let's go back in time to, I don't know, 2015, which I think is when this book was written, of course. And so they go back to 2015, which is like the ultimate Star Trek trope. I can't. It's kind of endearing to me. I mean, Star Trek Picard had a whole season on it, which is probably the worst season of Star Trek in Star Trek history. But I love them going back to the present time. It's such a cheap, like, production-wise way to have an episode. But anyways, so they go back to 2015, and of course they run into, there's a Comic-Con happening. It says they're in the Seahawk Nation, which I'm not sure. It must be like Seattle. Something on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, I'm thinking. I mean, Erikson, I believe he's writing this in Victoria at the time. I think he's in Victoria now. I assume he was writing it at the time. So I'm picturing somewhere on the West Coast. Anyways, there's a Comic-Con going on. So they fit right in, of course. They take the Doctor, who is this weird beach ball alien, but everyone's like, ooh, cool animatronics, my dude. Nice cosplay, etc., etc. So they're ostensibly there to get krill, but they can't find any krill. The oceans are polluted, everything's polluted. Cars are spewing toxins into the air. It's 2015. So they go to this Comic-Con, and because they're like, oh, Mr. Pine, which who could Mr. Pine be? Isn't him, we need the second. So Captain Hadrian goes on stage as the stand-in. And there's a confrontation with his liaison, who's the only, not sane one, kind of the only, well, no, Sindauer's pretty sane. Anyways, the issue's solved. They go back to their planet, but not before Hadrian runs to a novelty shop across the street and gets something, but they don't know what. But yeah, so they go back to the future. They go back to the future, but minus 6 weeks, so that they can solve this issue before the giant krill spaceship shows up and kills everyone. But they're like, we couldn't find any krill. What are we going to do? I thought this was hilarious because as soon as he poured a packet of something into a cup of water, I'm like, oh my word, it's sea monkeys. And of course, it's sea monkeys. Sea monkeys are krill. So he saves the future with sea monkeys. So the thing comes, detects the sea monkeys in the ocean, and leaves Earth alone. So he saves the day. Yeah. And I thought that was amazingly hilarious. Now it gets weird because we jump to, I think it's the last chapter, and I don't expressly remember a time jump being recorded, so I don't know if there's still 1,000 years in their future, or if at some point they went back to their normal timeline, or if it even matters. But they come across the Century Warbler, almost destroyed. It's disabled. Captain Han Solo is he's been attacked by the Clang. It's Betty, the Wrath of Betty. Betty's back, and so Hadrian engages, much the same as the Clang in the first book. As soon as they send out a fleet of drone or fighter ships or whatever, they kill one, and the Clang immediately surrender. And he's like, but Hadrian doesn't want to accept their surrender, because if you accept their surrender, then their whole plan is to bring in affiliation investment and then like renege on their loans and cause some kind of internal economic collapse. Hadrian knows this, so he's like, no, we're not going to accept their surrender. But Han Solo's like, no, I will select. I want to accept it. Send me to their bridge. So they send him to the bridge, but this whole time he has a pet Clang, like a younger one. Captain Han Solo has this pet Clang, and it's been spewing pheromones on him this whole time, which is why his bridge crew's been acting crazy. So they send him to the ship, and the pheromones, plus turns out that the pet he has is like a Clang prince. So chaos ensues. The Clang prince goes back to the Century Warbler, takes it over as their captain, and flees, while Han Solo is stuck on the Clang ship in a sex swarm, as it's referred. And then it ends off with I forget why, but Hadrian goes to engineering, and it turns out that in that one room where they keep the lethal radiation, the door was ajar and a ball went flying through or something, and so Spark chased after it and got stuck in the room with lethal radiation, and so Spark's up against the glass, dying, and says, I will always be man's best friend, and then dies, and it's like, oh no, because it's the Wrath of Khan. And then they shunt the lethal radiation from this room to a supply closet where some guy left his lunch in there. He's like, my bagged lunch. Like, too bad. And then Hadrian rushes in, gets Spark, and reaches deep up his posterior to hit the reset button, and Spark comes back to life, and Spark's fine. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. That's a very brief overview just for me, if I ever can't remember what the plot of this was. But I keep saying heartily. I heartily recommend that you read this. It's just packed full of references, and every sentence is just a joke, and it's just joke after joke after joke. Very quick read, very hilarious. Anyone who knows anything tangentially about sci-fi will have a good time. I'm certain of it. Yeah, that's Willful Child, The Wrath of Betty. There's one more book left, the Search for Spark, which I don't know what's going to happen to Spark, because as far as we know, Spark's still alive. If he had remained dead and they had to somehow repair him, that would make sense. But no, they hit the reset button and he's fine. But yeah, we'll see next time what happens in the Search for Spark. I can't think of anything else to add, so that's it.